Oh, they're probably gonna sing Polyphony around a fire again. Did I tell you about this?
Polyphony.
So my last dorm event.
Oh, I do remember this.
So my last dorm event. We're having a fire for someone's birthday. I'm like, wonderful. I've been struggling on the dorm life a little bit this year. It's not like back in the good old days when we used to party all the time.
Yeah.
No. So we're having a fire, and I don't go to many dorm events. So I'm like, go to this one. I can struggle through a fire, even though they talk about ACTs most of the time. I can hang out around a fire, go to the fire. I'm like, this is great. I'm smoking my pipe. They don't like that already. No, I'm not allowed to smoke at brother sister dorm events. So around the fire, I'm like, around the fire. Just let me smoke my pipe. Whatever. They're not happy with me already. We sing happy birthday. I'm like, this is wonderful. Nice little happy birthday.
I know the lyrics to
I know the lyrics to this. We do 2 rounds. I'm like, cool. I know rounds. Boom. After the rounds. All right, guys, let's do polyphony. I'm like, but this is a fire. What are we doing here, guys? And yeah, polyphony's beautiful.
Yeah.
But there was just a segment of us that just like slowly backed away and all went to Athanasius. I'm like, and then I walk into the dorm, right? And they go, dorm event tonight, huh? Like they expect me to up at this point. Anyway.
Yeah. Man, that's so sad. Like, I feel like that was the best part of like campfires. You get to smoke, you get to hang out, you play guitars. It was the whole deal.
Yeah, that's
Well, okay. Your
Athanasius
class was a lot of
Oh, yeah.
Irish music. Like you
No.
guys did Irish all the time, which was good. But then after your class, now, okay, the Athanasius crowd does like purely cowboy music. So it's like Culture Wall and like them. These guys do like polyphony thing.
Who knows what we do? Not me.
And then we really don't sing that much Irish music.
We do not. Irish music
Which is really
rare.
sad. It's gone.
It's like St. Patrick's Day was about it now.
Like it was Chris Carter and like Ben Bridge, Joe White. They were like the kind of ones who led it all.
Yeah.
And when they left, it was just I don't know. It's kind of sad.
It's really sad.
I do like the cowboy music.
I do like the cowboy music aesthetic.
It seemed like.
Yeah, we do have a plan though. I hope this works out before the end of the semester. We're gonna take 80s rock hairband music.
Yeah.
And a guy in our dorm plays banjo. And we're gonna set it to banjo. And me and him are gonna rock it. It is gonna be hilarious.
I should come for that.
JD and Thomas already agreed to come up.
I'm so
A little dude looks like a lady, Aerosmith to a
yeah.
dude looks like a lady. It's gonna be hilarious.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's sad that stuff died out like that.
Yeah. It's not the same school that you were at or that I was at freshman year.
You think it lost a lot of its character? Or do you think it lost a lot of, I don't know, the life maybe?
I don't know.
I don't know. Sometimes I'm wondering if it's just like our perspective as we've gotten like tired of this place or we've gotten used to it. The novelty's died down. Like if that's just skewing our opinion, although I am convinced that there's at least some objective changes where, we don't sing as much Irish music anymore. There's not as many just like spontaneous get-togethers. Like even just in our class, it's hard to get people to like come to the Pequod.
It's so hard. You have no idea.
Yeah, and it's like people. Well, okay, one of the things I remember changing was I don't know if it was our freshman year or sophomore year, but they like really hammered down on the movie policy to where like if you cannot watch a movie or a TV show or YouTube during the week, you can only watch it Friday night and Saturday night. And so like people don't follow it, but technically it's illegal, and so you can't do it around prefects. So now
you can't do it in like school buildings.
Yeah, you can't do it. So now it's like no one gets to watch anything for the whole week. Friday night comes along, we're like, oh, let's go watch a movie, and instead of like, oh, let's go to the Pequod or let's have a bonfire. It's
always
the tendency is like movie or let's go watch something, which it is sad because you're not going to do much partying on like a weekday.
No.
So I mean, I think some dorms still have a culture like that, but
I don't know.
I remember like pretty much at least once every other week we would have a big bonfire up in the dorms.
Oh,
and
yeah,
everyone would
like-
come.
I remember Bernadette Wall and like that class. They had a fire almost every night on the steps of Athens.
Yeah, I mean they
But
went they went to
didn't
the
do it
bar a
like
lot.
school,
Yeah.
and they drank a lot. But
Yeah.
it's like I don't know. We've strayed and like we had that as an option. We had your class, which just y'all did the Pequod thing a lot. Y'all did the fire thing occasionally. It was mostly Pequod and just hanging out and going to the bar. Those are what y'all did. And now it's just like we're on the other side of all that. It's like we just don't do except for a few times a semester. Like
Yeah.
we had the first fire up at the dorms was like my birthday
Mm-hmm.
this semester. Right, where it wasn't for like a dorm event.
Yeah,
All right, and then we had another one. You weren't at this one, but a sophomore had planned it because his girlfriend was visiting here for a few days and then she was leaving. So he just like got a bunch of people that he knew and was like, let's go to Sinks. Drive all the way to Sinks. Really awkward encounter up at Sinks, but we're not going to talk
What?
about it on the podcast. And then it's like Sink has 3 feet of snow. Huh? Who would have thought that, Diego?
I literally told you.
I told him, and he's like, nah, it'll be okay. Gets up there. Nah, not okay. So turns back around, and then we end up at the dorms, and it's just like tons of people there, right? Because it's something that everybody likes to do it. It's just like, I don't know why we don't. I don't know if it's become a thing. I've seen this in our class a lot. The fact that we used to be like, I thought we had a good balance between studious and fun freshman year,
Yeah.
and we've become more studious.
No, Briggs, we don't study though.
Listen, let's not be too honest on this podcast. Okay, until this semester, I had never skipped as many readings as I have now. Until this semester.
Yeah.
Right? Now we don't study, but like as a trend, I think we were like, a good balance in the beginning. And then the school was like hammering down on like academics, and it became like such a big part of like, oh guys, we're here for the academics was what kept being told to us. And so we kind of just pushed aside the community thing and we sacrificed the community for the academics, which is a fair thing to do, right? Because why are you here at the school in the first place? To be educated. We can go into the whole what it means to be liberally educated after this, because I feel like that brings up a lot of interesting ideas into this. But like as soon as you like are saying, oh, I can only do academics because that's what I'm here for, then it produces the problem of, well, I can't go and do the fire thing because the school reading is the more important thing. And like I feel like we at this point, I feel a lot happier with what we've done this semester. Like, I'm not saying that I finish every reading or I do a lot of the readings. I do most of them. But like the other night when we just went out to the lookout, drank whiskey and smoked pipes. So that's what we're gonna remember from all this. Like, yes,
Oh yeah.
I'm happy I went to all these classes. I'm happy I read the majority of most of these books. But right, like looking back on our class the past 2 years, we missed out on a lot of that. Right? Like the fact that we didn't do those things until what do we have? 4 or 5 weeks left of school.
Yeah.
Right? Like we just didn't do that for the longest time.
Well, I think the problem's not like that academics and a good social life are like inherently competitive.
No.
Like the thing I regret, and we kind of had this freshman year,
Mhm.
but more like somehow blending the two where we were like doing the academic thing as a community
Mm-hmm.
or like just reading together. Like I remember freshman year, we would get together and read the
Uh-huh.
Iliad out loud.
Mhm.
And that like, yeah, you're not going to read the Iliad as closely or as perfectly if you're with a bunch of people. It's going to be kind of distracting. But it was a moment where we were like coming together,
Yep.
having fun, but we're also doing the thing we're here to do.
And
I think that's the main thing that we've lost is like
Yeah,
people
agree.
are either like, okay, we're either going to go play euchre and party and drink, or we're going to go do the school thing, and we can't like we don't bring them together as much
Yeah.
as we should.
I think you're right about that.
So like if we could get together, even just around a fire, do the school thing. I mean, this is kind of like the whole idea with the practicum thing I had, which
I know,
was
I love
like,
that so much.
let's get together.
We should
do
tell
a
Tom.
formal- Yeah. So senior class right now,
Mhm.
I asked the professors about an idea I had of just like having an informal out of class discussion time with the professors about like where we go from here with our education.
Mhm.
There's like, look, we've been here for the past 4 years now. We've been given this ideal of the contemplative life, of the life of liberal education,
Mhm.
we've been immersed in this thing. We've been doing the contemplative academic thing for a long time. But now we're going into a world where that is not favored. Whenever you're doing something that's not useful or not active, you're going to kind of get pushback from society.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, okay, it would be nice, at least from my perspective, and hopefully from other seniors, to just revisit what this contemplative life ideal is, where it comes from, how to do it,
Yeah.
but then also talk more about like the world we're going into and what we should expect. And so the faculty, some faculty members really liked it, and
Didn't he not?
some didn't.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny to me.
But anyway, so we got together last night for the first time, and I liked it. It was kind of rough at the beginning,
It
but I
was
liked
so
it
good.
because it was like I told everyone at the start, I'm like, look, and Mo Milligan actually brought this up earlier, but in class, sometimes it's like you just want to say what the professor wants to hear.
Yeah.
Like sometimes
Yeah.
you're saying things, you're like, okay, so this is the argument, right? Like this is what you want us to
Yeah.
say. Not all the time, but sometimes it's like, do I really believe that?
I know.
I don't know. It's not important.
Yeah.
So I told everyone, I'm like, okay, let's be genuine and let's be practical here.
Never been more genuine.
And then yeah, people. It was like we got some questions out there that we wouldn't have gotten in class.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because I think we got to a place where we could answer them genuinely.
No,
or
absolutely.
at least closer to that. And we saw the professors like they were like seeing where we actually were.
Yeah.
So anyway, the idea is that we want to find a way to bring what we've had these past 4 years into our lives after this college, and not just like shove these 4 years into a box that we don't open for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
So that's a huge task, but yeah, I don't know where we started.
We were trying to talk about the idea of balancing school with the community.
Yeah. And a big thing we came to, I think, in the discussion last night was a lot of people think of, the contemplative life or the intellectual life. They think of it as equivalent to academics or equivalent to reading books. And I mean, that's part of it for sure. But we started talking last night about like, okay, how can we be contemplative or like intellectually engaged, even when like we're making chairs or like
carpentry, redeemed.
Let's go. Yeah.
During this practicum, well, we're not supposed to call it a practicum. We got censored today for using the word practicum. Anyway, to be a rebel as I am in this practicum, at one point we were talking about the contemplative life, and I just was like, you know what? I could never talk in front of Dr. Bolin in ethics class. Like, I refuse to talk in that class, mostly because he's so smart that I'm just too scared to talk in front of him. Right. But it's like, especially if I'm about to be like, no, I don't believe you. I partially too scared to do it. Secondly, didn't want to be proven wrong and have to accept his point. So I just wouldn't bring up my counter objective because then I was like, invincible ignorance. Let's go.
Okay. Not sure that's how it works,
yeah,
but okay.
But I was like, okay, can the active life be the contemplative life? It was like the question. I was like, I know that for me, like when I'm working, when I'm constructing something with my hands, when I'm doing carpentry, right, that is the time that I feel most fulfilled as a man, right? I don't care what Aristotle says in book 10 of the Ethics, chapter 7, right? I personally am most fulfilled when I am working, right? And I can look at my work and say, this is good, right? I'm reflecting God's creative act in this moment, and I feel like I am fulfilled, right? And that was something I never wanted to say in politics. I sat in the corner, I was like, every time we talked about the contemplative life. But in this practice, I was like, I don't think this is right, right? And it was so, like, Dr. Bowen was like, well, why didn't you say that in ethics? I was like, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But just to have that side of it, right? Where it's like, no, the contemplative life, or what we think is the contemplative life of someone sitting in the clouds, doing the philosophy thing, devoid of all connection to reality. That's not even close to what we're trying to get at with the contemplative life is the best life.
Yeah.
Right. And so trying to see Dr. Grove was like, yeah, some people aren't made to do the book thing for the rest of their life. Right. So like seeing that even our professors understood that objection, like, yeah, everybody has their own talents.
Yeah.
Right. And there's some ways in which you are going to be the best contemplative person you can be by building chairs, right?
Mm.
And just understanding that there are different ways that we can fulfill, like different facets in which we can fulfill the contemplative life besides just being a bookworm.
Yeah, I think Dr. Grove put it really well
Yeah.
when he said, everyone is called to be contemplative, but not everyone is called to be academic.
Yeah. I think that's a
and-
good distinguish.
Yeah, because I think what a lot of people do is they're like, okay, they hear the contemplative ideal thing or the life, the intellectual life, and the image they attach to that is like, yeah, the person reading his book or the professor kind of playing mind games, and they say, okay, obviously those images are not attractive to me. That's not what I think of as happiness, and
Yep.
so this whole contemplative thing is not for me. It's like it's just a kind of conclusion, a good conclusion on paper, and not actually happiness, which is what Aristotle claims. But I think that's just a problem with the imagery you're associating with it. You're saying that this one like branch for select people of the contemplative life, some people are called to do the academic thing and pursue that kind of knowing.
Yeah.
That's not the whole thing. That's not like the only way you can be contemplative. And like with Big's example, I think maybe it's more challenging to have contemplation in the manual arts.
I agree.
Like
There's a
probably
different
most
focus.
carpenters are not thinking the way Biggs is thinking.
Yeah.
But if he's able to do it, probably largely because of his background in.
To do this after what we've done for the past 4 years hinges upon the fact of separating the contemplative from the academic. Right? If we think that I can only do the contemplative life if I'm reading books, right? That's just wrong. And I think this is something that came out in our conversation. That was last night. Right? Last night is that contemplation itself is even in the act of coming to know, right? It's resting in the knowledge, right? It's that aha moment, right? And I think that's something that we forget about when we start talking about this contemplative life thing, because the past 4 years is not the contemplative life for the most part. Maybe a little bit senior year where you started going, aha, I see what we were doing freshman, sophomore, junior. Freshman, sophomore, junior year, first semester, senior year, right? If we think that those are the only times that we can do the academic thing, then when we leave these 4 years, we're gonna go, well, I can't do it anymore. I don't have these participation grades to make me do it. But if I recognize that contemplation is the act of resting in the accumulation of knowledge that I've gotten in these past 4 years, and I don't stop thinking about everything, right? That means that, because that's what it means for me when I say like building a chair can be a contemplative act, right? Because for me, in order to truly contemplate, I have to be doing something, right? I am not the kind of person that can sit in a chair and just think. Right? Like it drives me crazy to try and do that. But when I'm doing, right, when I'm building something, when my mind, I don't even have to think about what I'm doing. If it could be something that's boring as planing boards, right? Like if I'm just doing this mind numbing action, it's just like I'm doing, and I have the free space in my mind to just contemplate, right? If it's not something right in front of me where I'm struggling over, it's like, no, it's like these random thoughts that pop into your head that have meaning that you wouldn't even have been able to think about if it hadn't been for the past 4 years, right? So basically, it all comes down to you can't shove the past 4 years in a shoebox and put it on it. It's like, oh, these were WCC times, right? It's like, no, this is something for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And That's, I think what you were talking about, we talked a little bit about last semester with our all school seminar. We read Joseph Pieper, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and um,
Try to
what yeah,
together.
we did. Yeah, I think it went pretty well. But I mean, yeah. Anyway, but one of the things we talked about is like the way he presents his version of contemplation, like the ideal of leisure. He talks about it again and again that it's something that requires silence for, like it requires, and something that therefore is not very, accessible in the modern world of there's so much noise and so much uh, stimulation from the outside world. But anyway, he talked about we need silence to be contemplative, both, literal silence, but also mental silence, where our mind is free to roam in a way. And one of the discussions we had then was about there seems to be like a particular kind of silence that is accessible when your hands are busy.
Yep.
Like when you're working with your hands.
This is my
I mean, not with all, not with all manual labor. Like some of it is more literally mind numbing, but some of it, I think like carpentry, I also think like farming or other activities like that. It's a way in which you're doing something and because your full concentration is not required by that task per se, then your mind is kind of opened up to this calm, this silence. And that, like in my experience in high school, during the summers I used to work on a farm, a hay farm, and I used to have a job where I was the irrigation guy. I was kind of like the lowest of the low. So I had to yeah. So I had to walk out and like walk these huge fields and go to the middle of each of the movers and move the sprinkler lines. So I did a lot of walking in tall hay, and I would just kind of turn my mind off the task at hand and just kind of think about things all day. And I remember one of the farmers I used to work with, he was like an old Italian man, and he said, some of my favorite moments at this farm are just walking out there in the morning and praying a rosary. And I'm like, that's a pretty good life, like to have that be your job where you can do that. And I think that's a genuine form of this contemplation thing we've been getting at, where like the excellence of the mind, it's not something that it's not something that always has to look like having your nose stuffed in a book.
Right.
There's different ways to get at it, and I think that's a really important point to bring out for people, especially on this last year of school here.
Because wasn't one of our examples for that seminar like if there's a man in the desert, gets dropped off, right, and he's told dig this hole, right, and then he gets like the guy comes back that dropped him off in the middle and goes fill the hole, right, and then leaves for like another 12 hours, right. Did that man have leisure? That was one of our questions.
I don't know where that came from.
I think that came from me, right? Well, it came from an argument between me and Kate.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because like I wanted to like pinpoint on the fact that working can be leisure. Like this is something that I came into contention with Pieper. But I also, the more I think about Pieper, right? It's often that when I come into contention with a good author, it's not them that's wrong. It's just me.
How you understand.
It's how I understand them, right? Because ultimately, you have to admit, they knew what they were talking about. And I think with Pieper, the biggest thing was, right, this leisure that we're seeking for, out of this silence. And he wants to say that it's like a time that is completely set apart, right? Ultimately for God. Correct me if I get this wrong at any point, right? Like, and ultimately a time set aside for God, right? And the whole example of the person digging a hole basically gets at, well, a person can be doing anything, right? But it depends upon the intention of the person, which will either make it leisurely or not, right? And this is what, like, ultimately for me, because like people really strikes hard against work as being the defining character of a people and of a person, right? You don't want to be just a person, a cog in the machine going off to the factory and you find your fulfillment there. You go back home, you take your time off from work, right? And then you go back to the factory. Like we want to do away with this idea that we are just laborers and we want to set aside our time for leisure or for something. But like for me, I was like, no, there's gotta be a way in which I can work leisurely. I was like, I've had this experience, right? There's got to be a way that I can describe it. And like the most absurd way I could get at it was the guy digging a hole, right? If I'm doing it with the right intention, it doesn't matter if it's mind numbing or whatever, right? If I'm filling that time with something worth thinking about, right? Something that's good, then what does it matter what I'm doing with my hands?
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know. But there's a lot of ins and outs. And I think like this is something me and John have argued about is like, okay, that's a good thing, right? If you're doing a work and contemplating something good, but is it the best thing? Right? If it's still you having to have this medium in order to do the contemplation thing, are you doing it to the best that you can?
Yeah, it's something that we talked about last night a little bit that um really interested me was okay, like before I came to this college, I think probably before most of us came to this college, when you heard about the contemplative life, a lot of it was associated with religion, like the life of the prayer contemplation thing as the third level of prayer. And that's just my background. I came into it, and when we started talking about it here at this school, it did get a lot more of the academic connotations where the prayer aspect was lost for me at least. I mean, I don't think that was just kind of my response to what was being given to us. But we were talking last night a little bit about the saints who really have achieved the constant prayer ideal, like prayer in every moment, and the idea that they're contemplating God at all times. It's not as if all of those saints at least are stuffed up in their cell doing nothing during that time. Like the best saints, or at least the ones that we think about the most, are somehow having that constant connection with God and contemplation of the highest things while they're serving the poor, like while they're at the very opposite extreme in terms of their active life. And that like so having that ideal in mind, like you have to have some sort of understanding of true contemplation that allows for that, or at least could get to that state where it's a constant thing for you. You're always in connection with the highest things, and it's not just a hobby you do. Like it's not something you just you come home from, or come home from work and then do. It's something that has to be your whole life, because Aristotle talks about it as not just a nice pleasant pastime, but as happiness, as like what will fulfill us as the beings that we are. And that kind of thing, it has to be in your whole life. And I think finding, first of all, like for us right now, finding a kind of life, a way of life that allows for that, depending on who we are. Some of us, will be more in the active sphere. Some of us might even go on to grad school. Some of us will become teachers. Like, but whatever choice we make, considering our own character, how in that choice can we be contemplative, and how can we do what this school has kind of given us to do in that life? And I don't think it's going to look the same for all of us. And I think realizing that is really important, because people who think it's only a certain thing you can do to be contemplative are going to give up on that pretty quickly.
Yeah. And that was definitely the trap that I fell in, especially with having Dr. Bolin for ethics. Like he gives very an idealistic picture, right? And he like doesn't accept anything less than that ideal. At least this is the way it was presented to me in that class. And so just like I was very jarred by it, right? And I just wanted to prove the opposite. I was like, no, this isn't the best thing, right? Like my construction can be the best thing, and like I will find a way to prove you. But at some point we have to just accept, no, it's not. It's not the best thing, right? But we can see the good in all things.
And it could be the best for you.
And it could be the best for me, right? Like understanding that we're all particular people. And we're not like when Aristotle's in his book 10 of ethics, from 7 to 10, we're dealing with perfection at this point. And so he's giving us here is the best that you could possibly be as the best man, right? No one's going to live up to that, right? Like not even Aristotle himself. Right? This is just the ideal that this man set forth as the height of humanity. But is that it? Right. And like, I think it's interesting that you bring up Christianity as a form of contemplation, because I don't even know if the ideal for Aristotle was even achievable before Christianity. Right. That fact that like, I don't think like the Greeks themselves couldn't do the contemplation thing throughout their entire day. Right. Like we even talked about this in class. At some point, they had to eat. Right? They broke their contemplation at some point, and they were no longer doing the best thing. They were doing the vegetative soul thing, right? And so it's like Christianity brought about a way for man to pray and contemplate with every action, with every thought, in the way that Aristotle wanted it to happen.
Yeah, and that's what really interests me in like authors like Joseph Pieper or even like Aquinas when he talks about
Mhm.
contemplation, it's much more like I find it much more uh concrete. Like when
Yes.
Aristotle talks about it, like you get convinced as in like, okay, this is the best thing to do. But the question of like, okay, what does this life look like isn't really answered by him. He kind of vaguely just says like, okay, thinking about the highest things and in the best possible manner. Um, but yeah, once you get like a better notion of God,
Hmm.
of the highest thing, then it seems like the whole ideal of contemplation makes more sense. Like the what convinces me that the contemplative life is really the most meaningful thing you can do is not that it's, acquiring intellectual knowledge per se, but it's a way for me to see God in kind of everything I do.
Yeah.
And like if I think that's really the essence of contemplation, seeing things and what they come from,
Hmm.
God. That's the heart of it. And that's something that, yeah, I don't think anyone can do without. Like if you don't have that, regardless of what your brain power is or what state in life you are, like everyone needs that. And that's what's going to make them happy in this life and in the next life. And that's like, yeah, how do we get that is another question, but that's what we all have to aim for sure.
Well, I think you're onto something because I mean, it's like God gave us 6 days to work and 1 day to rest.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting that he gave us that ratio that, like, you give this small section of your whole week and actually like devote entirely to him or to him in certain respects of like being with friends or something like that. It's like enjoying the goodness of life. But those other 6 days is you're creating all that to happen for the seventh day.
Mm.
So it's like we're the sub creators that are on a mission to make our world reflect God's world. But I don't know why he has us work.
Hmm.
Like, I think that's a
The
big
fall.
question. Yeah. Well, but
Toil, toil, toil.
Well, we
we
were
were
still
supposed to
still
work.
I know.
it just became hard after.
Yeah.
That changes everything.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Would you ever wonder like why he made it so like we're supposed to work for things? Because it's like life
That's
is
the
a gift.
hardest thing.
Yeah,
Like, I struggle with this so much.
Yeah.
that's my
One of our
Why'd you make
classmates.
life so hard?
Yeah. One of our classmates wrote his thesis and did his oration on I think, entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
And I think his basic argument, I didn't spend that much time with him about it, but was that like in being creative, being even in the business world, like in being active in that kind of thing, that creative power of us is an image of God.
Yeah.
And so like partaking in that creativity, and he was making the case even for like the modern business world, but I
Mm.
think it's probably more visible in like things like carpentry or the arts.
Yeah.
Doing that is a valid way, probably one of the most genuine ways of fulfilling our mission as images of God, like as
Mhm.
trying to partake in the image of Himself that the Creator gave to us.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that we would have had to do before the fall.
Mhm.
Like my image of the garden before the fall is yes, man working to tend it
Yeah.
and to keep it in good shape. Um, but doing so, knowing that the garden was filled with the presence of God.
Mhm.
And like that's the thing about like he got kicked out of the garden and now the work is hard. And
Yeah.
now that kind of connection, closeness with God while you're working is way harder to attain.
Yep.
Um yeah. So I think but even before, like it wasn't like we were just sitting around all day.
It seems like it all comes from the fact that we are a soul and body composite, right? At least for me, it wouldn't make sense for us to like the angels don't work, right? They're the ones that are just resting in the glory of God, right? And just in the perfect knowledge that God has gifted them, and they can just rest in it. And yet, we as the poor soul and body composite that we are, right? We're just like you have this ability to come to know in such a way. But even your knowing has to take work, right? And so it seems like it's necessary for the body to reflect what the soul also has to do. Like the way that we have to come to know knowledge also seems to be like, well, our body needs to have something that is similar to that. And so we have to work for a goal in our through our physical body as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because it's like Christ worked too.
Teleology.
Like he spent
Mhm.
most of his life working with his parents, like 30 years. We didn't hardly know anything about him except when he ran away.
Yeah.
And it's like, what was that all for? You know, I wonder if that was like the height of his life on earth, you know, it was like just being with Mary and Joseph and
Yeah.
with his friends. And he had a lot of friends, you know, the references in the Bible, like he was a good friend of Jesus and he was a good friend. He was pretty well known.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the first miracle is having enough wine for
Yeah.
nowadays terms a rager, you know, like that didn't happen, but probably, but like that's his first, it's like 180 gallons of wine. Like, that's a
Yeah.
lot of wine. But then, like St. Paul, I mean, he would make tents when he was preaching as a way to provide for himself because he didn't want to be a burden to anybody.
Yeah.
He preached during the day and work at night
Yeah.
because he didn't want to mess out on preaching.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if there's like maybe that's part of the gift of life is work, you know, because then we're able to experience in the same co-creative effort that God's doing.
Yeah.
So we almost get to see the same perspective that he sees the world in, like, because he's always constantly, in a way, he's always working, because he's always bringing about new life and new things into the
Mhm.
world for us.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Although I mean, maybe in this discussion we're going to the opposite extreme where we're forgetting about the seventh day.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, yeah, a big thing I think we're coming to try to realize is we can have this life of contemplation in the active world. But I think we're also realizing that if we didn't go to this college and read a lot of books and do the academic thing a lot for 4 years, well, maybe we couldn't have that. And maybe we would just become the people who are making chairs, not because they're, connected to an idea and trying to actually do it beautifully, but just as a kind of machine.
Yeah.
So to me, I think it's like, it has to be a way in which the book thing,
Mm-hmm.
at least in some way, is a kind of preparation for living that in the non-book world or the world of the active life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we get that in a kind of intense way for these 4 years. But I think for the rest of our lives, like, I don't think we can say, okay, I never need to read a book again. Like that.
Someone said that last
Yeah.
night at the practicum. I was like, oh,
It's not like
totally wasted. Like,
yeah, it's not like this preparation we've had at this school ends here. It's like something that's always going to have to be reinvigorating us and bringing us back. And like what you do when you read a great book is you're open to this kind of new level of reality and in the same reality you experience. Like you're, especially in our humanities classes, we're like reading these novels and seeing things play out before us in a way that makes them revelatory to us in a way that just plain experience wouldn't do for us. So anyway, I think I agree with you guys that like the 6 days of work is very important and we should never escape from that. But on the other hand, maybe especially in our fallen state, we also have to have that seventh day where it's moments of rest, moments of we're deliberately, directly connecting ourselves to the intellectual things. And I think it has to be kind of a balance for the rest of our lives.
absolutely. And it also seems like
Yeah.
the seventh day has to be the purpose for the other 6 days.
Hmm.
Right? I think this is the distinction that Joseph Pieper is trying to get at in Leisure on the Basis of Culture, right? Right. We don't want to go back home for time off of work, right? We want to work for time off,
Yeah.
right? Like that idea is right. Like you have to understand what your goal is, right? What are you orienting your life towards? Am I orienting it towards the 6 days, or am I orienting the 6 days to the one day?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a very big distinction on how you're going to live your life.
Yeah.
Because the things that we do in those 6 days, the manual arts, they are still, aimed at something else. They're not like ends in themselves. And
just throwing down the lingo.
well, I mean, understanding that
Uh-huh.
that what you do, like you can't rest in the chair. Well,
Watch and learn.
but yeah, at least most of the time you're not going to be making the chair simply for the chair's sake. You're going to be making something to sit in.
Yeah.
So there's a way in which the things you're doing in that sphere are not for their own sake, they're for some other sake, for some other end. But the problem is when you disorder your life in a way that you're only doing it for that reason,
Yeah,
like you're doing work for work's sake, you're doing business for business sake, and not because it's aimed at some higher ideal. And I think that's a struggle. Like what you just mentioned, sometimes we treat our days off not as like, oh, finally I get to do what I want to do, but instead like I just need to rest so I can get back to work on Monday. Like, and that's so sad. Like, how do you live your life that way? Like, you have to have some sort of meaning and reality beyond what you're doing in your 9 to 5 that you clearly realize that it's the 9 to 5 is for that. And once you have that realization, well, actually what you're doing in the 9 to 5 is going to be way more meaningful. And you're going to, even in those moments, be connected to this higher ideal. And like basically it should be your family.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, obviously it should be, you're doing this for God, you're offering it up. And you're doing it as something that while you're doing it, you can be thinking of God. And yeah, that's kind of the whole challenge of our lives right now is how do we get to that point?
Yeah.
But something actually we talked about in junior year from Dr. Bullen, the same professor. One thing he said to me really like I will probably remember it for the rest of my life. And he said during the whole COVID pandemic shutdown thing, before my time here at the college, it was kind of the year before that really happened. We got shut down for a while and all the professors, didn't have to teach classes in person. They were kind of all of a sudden had way more free time. And Dr. Bullen told us, he's like, for someone like me and a lot of other people here who have this ideal, like that time off was like, oh my gosh, I can finally do what I want to do. Like I'm finally free.
Yeah.
And he said for the rest of us or for the most of the world, that time was like, I can't go to work. Like, what do I do now? And like just like those two images of like, okay, these people, they were released from, the grind for a little while. And they're like, yes, I can finally do what I really want to do because my life is more meaningful than just working. And those people compared to most other people who are like, they were distraught by the fact that they didn't have a purpose to their life. They didn't have the work that they devote all their energy to. And then you get depression, you get all these, problems we've had since that time because people realized in those moments that they didn't have anything beyond their work, their job. And that's just like a really sad way to live your life. I mean, whatever job you're doing, if you find yourself being, devoid of meaning, if you lose that job, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of a weird balance, like, because it is easy to lose yourself in work thinking that it's what you're for. Because you see all this accomplishment and things that you see change because of what you do. And I think like it's almost like sometimes I fall into this too, where it's like, well, if I just work a little more, then I'll get all the things I really want,
Right. You'll get that new Milwaukee tool.
Sitting there, so I just got a little more time in.
Dude, there is a big sale at Murdoch's.
Oh, really? I didn't know about that.
Probably a good thing.
Sales call. Anyway, back to our point about this not being the basic number. What?
I know. Well, it's like, yeah, I think the thing is though, it's like we have to realize that we should feel. I don't like using the word pride because it has so many negative connotations, but like the fulfillment and what we do is like we are supposed to be forces of good in the world, and a lot of that good comes through work because in work, properly ordered to serving of someone else, and we get paid back a smaller portion of what we did to someone else.
Yeah.
That we can then use in the future.
Yeah.
It's like what money is essentially, it's the call option on someone else's time because you gave your time to someone else. It's a really cool idea. But it's so easy to think, well, oh, I'm a great person because I only do all these things for other people. Rather than saying like, well, am I actually ordered everything towards the right ends? Am I actually just doing this as a crutch because there's something missing in my life that I'm trying to fill up with this work?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I do that all the time. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'll just come home and I'm like, well, I don't really want to hang out with the tonight, so I'll just work, just do something else. And I'm like, well, is that really the best option? Should I be doing something that's maybe a little more fulfilling?
Yeah. And it's really tricky because you always want to be making other people's lives better. Like you don't, like that's a great goal to have, but like something in today's world you see a lot of is like the utmost goal of society is like people are gonna go out and make a difference, and like that's the kind of call of the modern world is you're doing something really humane or humanistic if you're making a difference in people's lives. You're doing something that really matters in that way. And that's beautiful in a way, but it's also, I think, the product of an atheistic culture in that, like,
Mm.
well, yes, we should always be working for the salvation of others' souls, but you also have to realize that your primary master is God. And like if you're if you've lost God and you're trying to fill that hole with, okay, well, I can at least help my neighbors, or like I can, run this charity program, or I can do these kind of things, that you're never going to fill that hole. And so sometimes it is a matter of, okay, I need to stop working for other people, or at least not give my full energy to that, because I need to have this connection with something even higher than my neighbor, something, the divine.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, it's hard to criticize people for helping people, because obviously like that's a wonderful thing to do, but at the same time you have to make them realize yourself that that's not the highest thing you're made for. You're supposed to work, you're supposed to be living for God, and even the service you render to your neighbor should be aimed at that thing. And so
That can so easily become right distraction, even like to the greatest extent idolatry. When you make the service to other people your God instead of God himself.
Yeah.
Like someone in our class wrote a very provocative thesis. At least it was provocative for me, right? It was basically about how to love your neighbor. I'm gonna get in trouble for this. I'd say that every time on this podcast. But it seemed like one thing that she was trying to say is that you can put your neighbor before God, and that's a good thing.
Mm.
Which
Hmm.
I don't know about, right? And it left me with a lot of questions, and it's still something I want to talk to her about, right? But like God gives us the commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself, right? And you're supposed to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, being, all that stuff, right? And so like, how do I balance my love of neighbor with my love of God, right? And that seems to be saying, or what we're trying to figure out is when do I put my neighbor, right, above God? Or when is the time that I'm actually doing the charitable thing properly, right? Because St. Augustine in De Doctrina basically lays out everything's going to be used except for God. God is meant to be enjoyed, right? And so in that way, it seems like, well, I'm supposed to be using my neighbor to a certain extent
Right.
to get to God,
Yeah.
right? But like,
Yeah.
how is this whole relationship of me, my neighbor, and God supposed to look like?
Yeah.
And it just seems like if I'm putting my neighbor before God, that's in a way making it idolatrous, right? Or perverted. But it's just, this is a
Yeah.
question. I have no answer.
I mean, that's a tall claim.
Yeah, I think the context she was making it in was like, how do you make the choice between going to mass or like helping out your neighbor in distress? And her point was,
Yeah.
a lot of the times it's the right choice is to help your neighbor instead of like doing the solely for God thing. And yeah, that made me think a lot too. And there's probably some things I disagree with her about. I think her main point was something like, we shouldn't see our love for God and our love for our neighbor being competitive or being like
Mhm.
exclusive, to where we
Yeah.
should see like we should be loving God and our neighbor in the same action, which I think that's something, yeah, that's
definitely true.
beautiful.
And that's what you were ultimately trying to get at.
I think so.
Your example.
Yeah. I don't, I'm not saying people should stop helping each other. People
No.
shouldn't be putting in work to make a difference in this world. But I guess I'm saying like you can't really do that in the most genuine sense without being aimed at something even higher than your neighbor, even higher than any difference you could render in this world. And yeah,
And you can't help your neighbor well if you're not aiming that towards something higher as well.
Yeah, but the problem is, like, I think a lot of people, even us, they don't realize that it's not enough. Like it can be extremely satisfying to just keep working, or helping someone out. Gives you those warm fuzzy feelings inside, and like you can feel that, and not feel, if you're lacking God, not feel that pain as much. And so it can really be a crutch where it's like I can do this thing, I can work, I can throw myself into my career, I can throw myself even into these like humanitarian efforts, and distract myself in a way from what I'm really missing. And that's the danger of this age, is that I think in a lot of ways we've lost God,
Yeah.
but we still have a lot of things in our culture that try to replace him. And one of those things I think can be just this idea of, let's be charitable, let's make a difference for our neighbor, let's do these things that are good, but when they're used as distractions from a deeper pain, they can be what destroys us, which is really scary.
Almost like we have this idea that if we fix all the problems, then we can rest, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like
There's never.
there's never time. So then you always feel like you're under the gun to make
Mhm.
stuff happen so that you can finally rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that when Christ was here, half the world was falling apart. And
Yeah.
he was just talking to his friends in the garden, or like
This world will
sitting
pass
on-
away.
I think that
Yeah.
was his
Yeah.
omniscient mind, not being
Yeah.
distracted by the things.
Yeah.
of this
But it's
world.
like
It's true.
it's like a paradox in
Is it?
Christianity, where it's like,
Christianity is just a giant.
well, yeah, but like we want to
Fuck.
make this world as good as we can and help our neighbor as much as we can, but at the same time we have this idea that this world is going to end and it's all
Mhm.
going to not work out. And like, how do you balance that? Like,
Yeah.
you're never
Yeah.
going to solve all the problems, and honestly, the world's probably going to end in a not great state. Like, that's the Christian viewpoint, where this world will pass away and we'll have a new world. So like, okay, what does that mean, like, in our actual lives? Like, how much should we work for making this temporary world to be a better place? And how much should we just, leave this world, the Benedict option maybe, or something like that?
No.
And just like,
Let me throw down some Cicero.
oh my.
Dominic with the Cicero book. That's just. I think that's a wrong mindset. I talked about that the last.
What part of it is wrong?
The escapism aspect of it, right? Like, if I can't fix the world, then I can just say, "World, you are doomed. I'm out." Right? I'm just going to retreat over here.
But it's so tempting.
Oh, it's so tempting, right? This is something I wanted to write about in my thesis or for my conclusion in my oration. My advisor was like, "Don't do it." Well, now's my chance to do it.
Hey.
This seems to be like one of the biggest problems with Christianity, right? And the fact that we are given this option, we are given this out. You are not made for this world, right? You're supposed to live in the world, but you are not of the world, right? Our allegiance is owed to a different kingdom, right? An eternal kingdom. So why should I care about this earthly kingdom, right? This is the question that I think that Christianity posed to the world. And this is why we're reading all the documents that we are in theology right now, right? Because church leaders of government looked at these Christians and were like, listen, I don't know if these guys are going to be good citizens, because we even have their allegiance, right? They already gave their allegiance to a different prince. How do I know that I can trust them? Right. And so this has just always been a problem. But to get back to like the idea that we are struggling, it's a struggle between us choosing this earthly kingdom over the heavenly kingdom. I think that's a distinction that we shouldn't even make. Right. And that's where I think Cicero comes in, is the fact that Cicero understood through philosophy that man has a spiritual end and man has a physical end, in the same way that Christians do, right? Aquinas would say the very similar thing, right? We have our supernatural end and we have our natural end, right? If I'm neglecting my natural end, can I get to my supernatural end well? Right? So, and part of that natural end that is contained within the definition of man is the fact that man is a social creature, right? And that Aquinas goes into this in the Summa, right? But like, we as social creatures have an obligation to the community around us, right? And that obligation comes in the form of piety to country, right? So if I just look at my country and say, well, you're going to hell, I don't care anymore. I don't care who our president is. I don't care who our vice president is.
Too close to home.
Just do whatever, do whatever you want on that border. I don't care. My borders are protected by angels, right? Like, if we adopt that mindset, we are failing to do the human thing.
Okay,
Right?
okay.
We're failing. We are a soul and body composite. And if we're just like, oh, I'm the soul now, that's all that matters to me.
But what about all the people that Christ tells to like go and sell all their belongings and follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Like there really is that in the Gospels and in the whole Christian
Yeah.
tradition where that's seen as kind of like the epitome of doing the Christian thing is selling everything you own, giving up all your titles, your positions, your political honor, and just working for the poor. Like
Mhm.
how do we can we even be good citizens of a country, a nation, if like that's the epitome of our faith?
I don't know if that's the
question,
epitome of our
yeah.
faith.
Well, okay, then
I think it's a facet of our faith, right? Like when we were doing theology last semester and we were looking at who is the church, right? We break it down to the different categories. One of those categories is the laity, right? And maybe this is a development of what was said in the Gospels, right? And that the Gospels are just giving us hints, right? And maybe that is the perfection of Christianity, right? But if you're going to have a family, can you do that? No,
Yeah.
right? It's not a practical way of living this out, right? So if I'm going to practically be a Christian and I'm practically going to have to live somewhere on this planet that is not the country of the kingdom of God, right? That's going to necessitate some duty in the fact that I live there, right? Even Caesar or even Christ understands this when he says,
Yeah.
give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, right? Part of that is that you have to give to your government, whether that be your time, whether that be bloody taxes, right? Like all these things, like we have to give what is owed to our country because they have given us a debt which we can never repay. Similar into the vein that Aquinas draws this comparison to our parents, right? In the same way that our parents give us protection and life, our country gives us protection and stability in a way that we wouldn't have it otherwise.
Yeah. I mean that gets into kind of almost scary discussions you see in like Aquinas and a lot of the church documents where
Mhm.
it's like the state is God in a way, or like the authority of the state, even in the political way. It if it's genuine authority, it has to come from God. And you know that then we get into this like, okay, if you disobey that authority for not good reason, then you're disobeying God himself in a way. That's scary to me.
That's
But
terrifying.
it's something like yeah, it
The
is
church
terrifying.
scares me as an American. Like,
Well, no, the
well, my
state
American
scares me
side
as a
is-
Christian.
There's a battlefield drawn right down the center, and I don't know which side is winning.
That's interesting that you mentioned that because I've been studying a lot about like history and economics and stuff lately.
Mm-hmm.
And something that's really interesting is that the person that's injuring you doesn't really have authority over you, do they?
It's injuring you.
Mm-hmm. So let's say if the
Interesting.
government is like taxing you out of your life,
Yes.
you know, they're essentially so corrupt that they're the ones destroying the world. It's like these
Yes.
are real evils. And so you don't really have allegiance to them anymore because their best interests are no longer your best interest.
See, but that's not the Christian perspective, unfortunately.
If it actually is, and they didn't think about it right. I know that's a huge
Huge,
like,
Ooh,
I know.
ooh, we're getting more version on. So there's the heretic line.
Yeah,
Add that into the spectrum.
Just buzzing it a little bit. But
No.
well, here's the thing. The government's main purpose is to protect your private property
Yes.
in the sense of
No.
Is it?
Limit. Sorry.
all right. Well, essentially, like your private property being your soul, your body,
Mm-hmm.
the people that you're in, like your children, for instance, and then your actual like physical property where you enable yourself to live.
Mhm.
So like the main purpose of the government essentially is to keep law and order so that everyone can have the fulfillment of their lives in the best possible way.
Mm-hmm.
Keep out the main purpose was like to keep out invaders from foreign.
Okay.
Almost every government turns on itself when it gets powerful enough because the people are doing well that it starts to corrupt and then becomes the very enemy that it's supposed to protect against.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
When it starts doing that, then you have to fight that thing because then you're putting your own life and the other lives before some organization, really. So it's like, even though they may be over you in written law, they may not actually be over you in practicality
Mm.
because they have essentially abdicated that role because of their actions.
Hmm.
So I think if you have like a good and honest and noble government, that's a good thing. But like you don't necessarily have to do everything they say. That's like why America was the first country where freedom was like so it was such a probable thing and then made possible because we understood that the government was here to serve us, not us serve the government.
Mhm.
And Alexis de Tocqueville, I hope you guys read this
Yes.
part.
Yes.
Oh,
Um,
man.
Well,
but he talks about how Europe lost the faith not because Europe hated the faith, but because of the faith, the church was it was in charge of all the government.
mhm.
Mhm.
When the government was going bad, they didn't understand economics. These people didn't understand the importance of how things work in society. They started to hurt society so badly that people were like, well, we got to get rid of this thing.
Mhm.
So they threw away the church and the state at the same time because they
Oh.
weren't separated. That's why the founding fathers said we're going to separate those two because the government always has stuff to work on. The church, we're not going to intermingle the idea of the church being true with the government being true because it's just a human organization. It's not like what God made, which is really fascinating because there's some cool stuff coming out of like the hidden American history of like how Christian we are.
Hmm.
The government.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, they had so I think in Congress it's been like called to order over 2,000 times in prayer.
Whoa.
And like most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were reverends and Christian leaders.
Mhm.
And so their whole thing was like put God into the country as much as possible,
Yeah.
but don't intermingle it with our faults.
Yep.
So that's where I'm thinking like I wonder if Aquinas just didn't think about this through enough. Because he's like, well, if they say a decree, you have to follow it otherwise, because God put them in authority and so forth. But he doesn't really talk about what's our responsibility to make sure it's good authority.
Yeah. I mean, he does at least say that it's a prudential judgment in terms of following a law, in that he does have some room for like there are some things that the government or any state can never ask us to do. Like if they ask us to violate God's law, obviously in that they're not acting as, God's ministers on earth. And so that, yeah, they've kind of broken the contract, or they've ceased being what gives them power in the first place. And in that case, you can revolt. But he also, I mean, he brings up a valid point, and other authors do as well, is that not following a law, or even, going further and rebelling against your government, that in itself is an evil. Like you don't want to have to do that, and it brings about evil things. Like even if you just don't follow a certain law, that's going to eat away at your and other people's respect for law in general. And like that's a step, maybe a small step, but it's a step towards anarchy in a way. So like, so you have to at least recognize that not obeying laws and rebelling against laws, that's
Mm.
a cost. And what do you get to get out of that? Are you going to get a higher good by not following the law?
Yep.
Are you going to actually lead to change, to a better regime? If you are, then absolutely that's worth it. Like don't follow the law. But if it's something minor, like maybe you hate the speed limits in town, something
Yeah.
like that, where following the law or just like buckling down and doing that thing,
Mhm.
that's it's not worth rebelling against that, because
Right.
that there is a cost to rebellion, and some causes just don't meet that cost.
Mhm.
So it is kind of a judgment, like what am I willing to go against the government for? And I think for us, like obviously our faith,
Yep.
and we have to ask ourselves, okay, what other things are worth that cost of rebellion and the things that come with a change in our regime.
See, right. Even
Yeah.
I wonder if faith is enough for rebellion, right? The freedom to practice your faith.
Well, at least faith is enough to make you not follow a law.
Yeah.
Whether or not
yeah.
it calls
Okay.
you to totally overthrow a government, that's a different question. I think.
Okay, but yeah, to call you
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
That's definitely true.
But but another thing you brought up, we've been talking a lot in theology class about the separation of church and state.
Oh yeah, here we go.
And a lot of the papal documents, the encyclicals that we're reading, and a lot of the class discussions we've been having are in a way pushing back against this whole modernistic ideal of the separation of church and state. Not so much in America specifically, but just in the general political sphere of like Locke and the more modern political theorists. And the claim that we've come up against a lot, which I find convincing, at least on some level, is that when the state, the community, the public sphere says that they don't care about religion or they don't want to do any religious things as a state, they clearly separate the two. How is that not going to lead to just saying, well, religion doesn't matter in public life? How is it not going to lead to us saying, okay, religion is cute for like individual devotion, but like the real stuff we do in society is that, that's not there. Because I think sometimes we see that even in this country where it's like, because the government has clearly stated that they don't make a claim towards your inner spiritual life, then we say, okay, well, we're going to have extreme toleration for all religions. And we're going to, in a way, say they're all on the same playing field. Like, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as, it doesn't mess with other people. And that's a problem because it does matter what you believe.
Yes.
And I want to say that the state, who should be the guardian, not just of my property in a physical sense, but also of my soul, like it should help me get to heaven. If it's making these claims that send a message to me saying religion doesn't matter, or like there's no objective belief that's important, that's bad. So like, how do you separate the church from state without saying that the church is meaningless?
Also, I think it's very important to distinguish America at its founding and America right now.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
We were given a handout by one of our professors. And it's basically it's from a recent book that came out. I can't remember the title, but it's basically looking at all the constitutions of the states, right? Looking at particularly the part where it's talking about the relationship of church and state and what is necessary to be part of the legislature in the state. And almost all of the states up until the 1800s, right? Like the beginning of the 1800s, required that you be Protestant and pass a test proving that you knew the Protestant faith well enough to be a part of this legislature, right? And so when we say that America from its founding had this separation of church and state, right? I don't think it's necessarily what you were just saying of like, well, we shouldn't have any relationship, we should have toleration for everything, because boy, did we not have toleration for everything, right? When we started off, right? We hated Catholics, first of all, hated Catholics, right? And it's just like Protestantism, we can call all Protestants equal, kind of, depending on which state you were in, right? Some were more preferred than others, right? But this new idea that all religions are okay, right? I can't discriminate against your flag and you can't discriminate against mine, right? That new idea is something that was not present within the idea of separation of church and state that our fathers had. It was more of what Tom was talking about, right? The truth of government and the truth of church, I think is what the way that you put it, maybe, right? The fact that I don't want to intermingle those two, right? Because I don't want to say, oh, the government got that wrong, right? And if the government got it wrong, then that means that the church got it wrong. Right. And if they both got it wrong, right, then like rebellion, right? We don't want that. We want to hold the church as this fundamentally perfect institution insofar in as much as its doctrine was given to us by God, right? And we don't want to see that doctrine being corrupted by its enactment by men, right? And so saying the church is true, cool. We're going to leave that over here, right? We're going to have the church inform us. Awesome. In order for you to be a part of this body politic, which we are forming, you have to prove to us that you understand the church's teachings and the morals which it is given to us, that we understand as good morals, right? And once you have proven that to us, now we can say, you are capable of making law for this country, right? That's what it was more so like, right? Because we looked at this in sophomore year when we were reading the Puritans, right? And that they had a fundamental agreement on what the morals of a community ought to be. Why? Because of their religious upbringing, right? And that they all assented to this same religious ideas. And so when if we throw all that away, that gets you to
Yeah.
to present America, where we're like, well, Muslims, Catholics, Protestants, atheists, Buddhists, whatever you are, you're good, right? As long as you're not infringing on other people's religion.
So are you saying it's something like, the original idea of America is, okay, yeah, we're not going to have like priests being president, or like we're not going to have a direct
Yeah,
political authority to the church, but we're also not going to say that I have to leave, all of my spiritual life outside of the political sphere. Like even
Yeah.
people who are in the legislative body, it's very explicitly stated that you should be bringing your faith into that chamber.
yeah.
You shouldn't be that, you shouldn't be acting as, a faith authority, but you should be definitely thinking that your faith, your religion is relevant to the public sphere.
Exactly.
It was
So it's like a balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
expected of like the big like founding fathers and all the like beginning offices in the government were like they were expected to pray and to think about all their actions based on what they knew of like the scripture. And I mean it wasn't always Catholics, but
Yeah.
it was like their understanding of what God wants. You should be making the laws based on that. So that was like talked about all the time, like written about. And
Mhm.
so they didn't want to get rid of the faith. Like that was the whole reason we came here. was,
Yeah.
Like
That's
if
true.
we wanted
Exactly.
a place where we could worship God freely.
Mhm.
And I mean, we're the only country in history that where men decided to do that.
Yeah.
Like the only other country is Israel, and that was God doing it for them. So it's like there's something so special that we have here.
Mhm.
And that's why, like, we became the greatest country in the world because we had the ability to find what we thought was the best path towards God. But I think a lot of things come into play when it's like, well, when all these new religions come up, it's like, well, anyone could just come up with a thing and say it's a religion.
Mhm.
I feel like there's a lot of things missing in those religions that would actually disqualify them.
Hmm.
Like, I think you could oh, this is a big claim. It's huge. But I think you could,
Absolutely massive.
I think you could disqualify Islam as a religion.
Hmm.
But anyway, so
We really want to get thrown off of YouTube.
but yeah, like I think the
See, I would disagree,
you disagree.
sadly.
Well, what was your point?
Well, I was getting to like how I think that the the encyclicals where the popes were kind of talking about that stuff, that was all very influenced at that time with them controlling a lot of political power.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they had and this is just their own thoughts too.
Mhm.
They may be holy men, but a lot of their thoughts may be flawed, like that happens with everyone.
Mhm.
And so, like, if they're trying to kind of say, well, this is how the world should work, and then now we have an idea of like, well, America was a different place and a different paradigm shift in our minds, and it really worked well for a long time. And you notice the times when it started to corrupt were appointed like after World War II when they took women out of the home.
Mhm.
1971 when they got rid of the gold standard. All these different things started compounding, and they were all deviations from the Constitution.
Mhm.
So every time the Constitution goes away in America, we see all these problems. And that's linked to the Declaration, which was based on that, where life, liberty, and it was supposed to be private property. We changed it.
Oh, really?
The pursuit of happiness.
Hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Really interesting. So,
A
but
little too Lockean.
yeah, well, it's really, he should have kept it though.
They
But anyway, yeah.
couldn't foresee 200 and what are we at? 220.
Somewhere around 250, I think, actually.
Oh, there.
Right?
Oh yeah, we're 250 in 2 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
But-
Anyway.
So I just that's my perspective because I think the popes may have been writing it out of just their own experience rather than actually thinking about the process of what's government for and how do
Yeah.
we meet those needs best.
Yeah. Hmm. But
Big question.
yeah, it's something like we can't let this American ideal of religious freedom translate into religious indifference, where it's
Yeah.
like we're a state that's not going to, go out and kill you if you're not practicing the state religion. Obviously, we're not going to do that. But at the same time, we can't be at a place where we're just saying that the public authority, the public voice
Yeah.
can say nothing about religion,
Mm-hmm.
which I think we've gotten to that place, like especially with all the controversies in the schools where you can't talk about God. That's like
Yeah.
that's not just religious freedom. That's
Yeah.
saying religion doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's something that, like, how do you have the one and not have the eventually it having lead to the other?
See, it doesn't seem.
No, yeah.
It doesn't seem as much to me that we shouldn't be able to say anything about religion, but the problem is more so that the government now can't say anything about religion.
Yeah.
Right, like that we've just like said, well, we'll just throw it all to the individual person. We are no longer trying to guide your moral standards or lead you to the best good, right? Like Aristotle in the Politics basically talks about how though a city might come to be, it exists for the sake of living well, right? And that living well, I think for that we would like to understand it as Christians is ultimately leading you to heaven, right? But if a country in the Christian era that we live in, right, is saying, well, it's not really our job to get you to do that. It's not even our job to like help you do it. We're just gonna sit back and you're gonna you can do it if you want to, right? It's not fulfilling the role of government in a fundamental way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard because especially when you're in the middle of a storm, it's hard to figure out where it came from, you know?
Yeah.
So like with
Modernity. It came from Hume.
Well, yeah, it's so interesting because it's like all the modern philosophers, they saw big problems and they were like, we're gonna just instead of like trying to figure it out, we're just gonna start over, come up with a whole new paradigm, make everyone adopt it, and the world will be fine again. They're trying to be God.
That makes so much sense.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to reveal myself.
Are you working on something, Biggs?
Huh?
Are you working on something?
No.
No.
The moderns are too easy to understand for me.
Mm.
Right? Where their thought processes came from, where they're going, right? I read it, I'm like, yes, you were saying the thing that Aristotle never said. Right. I'm like, finally, someone thought about it this way. And I don't know if it's because we're living in the postmodern era. And so like the way that we might have been habituated to thinking about certain things without even knowing that we were being habituated to it. We come to Aristotle with a prejudice that, in our first 2 years here, or 3 years even, that prejudice gets undone. And then you get back to the moderns and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, this can't be right. But then it's like, but it works so well. And I'm staying out of particulars here because I don't want to make John too mad at me. But yeah.
Well, that's true. They did identify a lot of the big problems. That's the thing. They're very good at that.
Yeah.
And there's a development that comes out of every single. I'm not saying that there weren't problems,
Right.
but it's like what we were talking about today. Kant was basically the first formalist mathematician, where it's from him that we were able to say, oh, it doesn't matter that these things don't, like, I can't experience them in reality, right? I can abstract them, and then like I can come to know them like purely logic or perfectly in my mind. And that doesn't mean that they're not true just because I can't see them, right? And I can't point to it, right? Like our big portion of our conversation in class today was talking about I and E and negative numbers, right? It's like point to me negative number, right? Like point to -5 for me, right? Like it's not something that we can actually point to, right? But it's like it's a concept that we want to understand is there, and that all came from Kant, right?
I think it's
I'm about to
interesting.
get got.
No. I do want to say that something struck me. Our metaphysics professor at the very beginning of this year told us that one of the problems with the modern world is that, yeah, we're living in a non-metaphysical age. And yeah, kind of a big sentence, but I think what he meant by it was as a society, as a culture, we have stopped thinking about the highest things, thinking about things that are transcendental, are greater than just ourselves. And because we've lost that, we've stopped thinking about that. Most of our focus of a culture as a culture is not how do we get to heaven, but instead like how do we be successful and how do we, make as much money as we can in this world. Because of that, yeah, I think that's where we start getting this whole problem we've talked about, like of religious indifference is like how do you find the cause in the storm is maybe looking at with these modern philosophers like Kant, Hume, and Descartes, Hegel, a lot of what they said was they kind of chipped away at how humans interact with the world, how they understand reality. A lot of their metaphysical works are actually just epistemology about well, humans actually, all these stuff that Aristotle and Aquinas and Christianity has taught us about how our intellect works. That's all wrong. Like we actually don't have the same kind of insight we claim to have, the same kind of spirituality we claim to have with the reality, and it's all really just experience and custom and things like that. Like those things, there's a lot of problems that they do uncover, and that it's understandable as a critique of Aristotle, but underneath it all, it's leading towards something like the intellect or man's spiritual identity as a being that is not just experience. It's not just an animal like that, like stimulus and response. When we lose that, I think that's when we start getting into modernity, where it is kind of non-metaphysical or non-spiritual age.
Yeah, absolutely. And you stop thinking, like, one thing we were talking about today is with metaphysics, right? You're just looking for stuff beyond nature. Right? We're trying to get to those fundamental truths which permeate throughout the world around us, right? But what the modern is trying to do is not think like, what can my mind know definitively, but how can I know that my mind knows definitively? Right? It's no longer a question of what can we know, right? It's like, what is the process by which we are doing this so-called thing, right? And if I can't lay down a process to explain it, then it's not happening, right? Is ultimately the trajectory that they go, right? Descartes is just going to go, let me turn into my inner self, as I sit by the fire.
I think, therefore I am.
I think, therefore I am, right? Like I come to know God because God is contained within me. I don't even need the world around me because all the perfections come from I, right? Like that was the Descartes thing, right? Hume is like, no, Descartes got it so wrong. I have to look at the world. I can only know the world and anything in the world insofar as I'm seeing it. I don't know if I agree with this perspective. I'm just saying with what my teacher summarizes Hume to say. I'm still a Humean at heart. But like that's what he says Hume is saying, right? Like it's this focus on experiential knowledge, and we can only have knowledge of the particulars, and we throw out the concept of nature, right? Like it's no longer Tom, John, Briggs that are all participating in this human nature that fundamentally unites us all. No, it's like you are Tom. And like you are John, right? Like we all have these characteristics of this human-like thing, but I can't know the secret powers that are working behind you, right? I can't know anything that is not physically able to be seen.
There's nothing common or objective to all of us that we share.
Exactly. And then Kant, Kant rises from him as goes like Hume, you were kind of right, but let me lay down a science to where we can definitively know about this, right? Because Hume is even weary about that, right? So we just see like just this progression of, well, it's no longer necessary. We're just gonna throw out what Aristotle them all accepted, right? And the fact that we can just do this thing, and now we want to know how do we do this thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just where that goes when you just begin to question the inner workings of your mind. Right? And this is something that has struck me, right? Because I would never question whether I have an immaterial soul, right? That would have never have even entered my mind until this year, right? It's just like I was taught I have an immaterial soul. The church says it. That's good enough for me.
Right.
And then I'm sitting in class and I'm like, do I actually have an immaterial soul? Right? Can you prove to me that I have it? Right. And like our professor got scared. Right. It was me and this other kid in my class, and we were just at it. Like, no, like I could know that just through custom. Right. That's just, you're not actually explaining it. You're just drawing upon what others said. Like, I want you to prove to me definitively that I have an immaterial soul and give me a process on how I can know that. Right. And as soon as we start to try and do that, right, it's no longer because, oh, it makes sense if we look around the world and this is the way that things work and we're the culmination of creation and we have these things called souls, right? If we throw all that away, can you prove it? Right? Like, and this is something that struck me, is like, is it gonna get to the point where it's like I need to accept the soul on faith? Right? Like, which is so weird, right? I know, like, I want to be proven that we have an immaterial soul, but I don't know if there's going to be a proof now that is satisfactory.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole drive for a proof for those kinds of things is maybe something that yeah, comes from this modern trend of I want to find all certainty in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talk about it again and again with these modern philosophers reading that what characterizes all of them is the turn to the subject, where it's like, do I want to find the absolute source of truth? Okay, I'm going to turn towards myself and like my mind, how my mind works, as opposed to people like Aristotle or the ancients and St. Thomas, where it's like truth is out there and it's a matter of me conforming my mind to it. That's when I have an experience of truth. So like that whole idea of this modern idea of well, I mean, to now it's stated explicitly, like this is my truth, like my reality. And I don't care if it's different for you because it's not an objective thing. It's just something that we define for ourselves in our own minds. And like, yeah, I don't know. That's based on a unwillingness to accept things that we didn't produce in our own minds.
Yeah.
Like we don't want to accept dogmas. We don't want to accept realities that can't be seen, can't be proved through like scientific methods, because all of those things are acts of humility. Like when you believe something by faith, you're saying, I don't have the power to know this, and I'm going to trust someone else who has that power to tell me that. And that's a hard thing to do as someone who wants to be certain of the world through their own power. And so, like, I'm not saying you can't find a proof for the immateriality of the soul or a proof for God. Like, you can find those things, but really being convinced of them, I think, is going to take something like that step of humility, where it's like, okay, I'm going to have to lay down my own powers for a minute and realize that I don't have enough to make, the cosmic judgment here. And that moment of faith, I mean, we all struggle with it, but I think as a society now, we really struggle with it, where it's like in this world where we want to define everything for ourselves.
Yeah.
That's something we can't find it within ourselves to do.
I know, like you said the term cosmic judgment, right? And me playing the wonderful modern, I would not like that phrase. Right? Like, what is this cosmic?
Well, yeah.
What is this cosmic judgment, and how am I participating in it?
I guess what I meant by that is the cosmic judgment, as in like I get to judge what the source of meaning is in the world or in the cosmos, and like I could like the do I believe in God or not? Like that's a judgment I'm making, and to me, like when those questions come up, it's like, gosh, what kind of being am I to think that I can answer that? like me saying that there's no God in the world. That's in a way putting myself as God, because I'm making that call, and then therefore, who's the highest being in the world? Well, the self, or at least the human, or whatever you want to say. But like, in a way, when you get to those huge questions about the nature of the cosmos, the basic reality of your own soul, when you start saying things and trying to seek proof, trying to define it for yourself, I think you get into a realm where pride is all over the place. Like you make
Yeah.
these judgments. When you say there's no God, well, the fool said that in his heart, but also like the fool who has this too big opinion of himself.
Or he has too much, but see, this is where we get into like modern physics, modern biology, right? All these things where, everything that we once thought was unexplainable, right? Now we're beginning to find reason for it,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, this is what's scary to me is like, the fact that, we have eyes, right? Creatures are the way that they are, right? And that was just something that they were created with a particular nature, right? And then that's the way that it's going to be, right? Like, boom. I got nothing else to wonder about. Horse is going to have sex, and then there's going to be another horse. Man is going to have sex. There's going to be another man, right? There's going to be this because that's built into our nature. Like produces like, right? But if we begin to like look at world through an evolutionary perspective, right, and that these things like evolved a certain way, right, and there's no. I lost my train of thought.
No.
Like how.
Well, I think what you're saying is like
Yeah.
modern science with its yeah. Well, yeah. What's your
Okay, because modern science, like when we used to be able to just say, man was created with this nature, right? That's the reason that it is, right? But now we can look back through our like entire DNA sequence and be like, oh no, man is like this because of these factors, right? These things by chance happened, right? And so the way that we used to like, in a way, mystically solve our problems, right? And just saying that this is the way that things are, that's no longer a good enough answer.
Yeah.
Right. And it's terrifying to me. Right. As a person that like, I don't like it. I'm being demystified by the world, demystified by what, like questions like the soul, right? Like, what if I can't explain it down to, well, these cells are doing these things and boom, then like the rhinome is reproducing this RNA here, and then we get this DNA, right? Like, I can't show any of that about a soul, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what do I do in a world, right? And this kind of gets back to our beginning point, right? Right? We're entering a world where we have an Aristotelian understanding of how things work, right? Or not how things work, but just like framework of the universe, right? And now we're even in this semester, we're shifting out of that to where like, whoa, Aristotle didn't have all this, but we're going to be combated every step of the way. I get out there and say, man has a nature and he was created such. Woo! I'm first one in the line to get shot, right? It's just like, how am I supposed to balance these views of wanting to be able to understand the workings of the world, right? But not having to have a particular like way of arguing to the fact that I have a soul.
Yeah. I mean,
that was a convoluted question.
Well, I think what you're saying is like the incredible explanations that modern science is able to give about physical reality, and like in a way, they're incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
Like knowing, like being able to say the kinds of things we're able to say about the human genome or about, even about space. Like we studied relativity in Einstein last semester, and there's like a lot of profound revelations that come from this kind of empirical science. And yeah, in a way, very satisfying that there's not much more. Well, there's always more to wonder about, but in a way, you feel satisfied that you know this thing. And I'm being reminded, I can't remember who this poem was by. It might be either Dickinson or Wordsworth, but back in high school, I read a poem where it talks about a flower. And it talks about there's a moment you can have of just appreciating the flower in its wholeness and its beauty, not really understanding it in its parts, but just understanding the flower as it is. But then you I want to know more about this flower, and let me tear off this petal to see what it's like, and then let me tear out the whole, separate the whole flower, analyze it down to its constituent parts, down to its atoms, down to its basic particles. And I might know a lot more about why the flower looks the way it does, but by the end of that process, I'm left with a bunch of pieces and no flower.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Oh, yeah.
by the end of that process, yes, you can say that you've analyzed it down to its elements and you understand it on that materialistic level. But in that process, you really have destroyed the beauty of that flower, and you can't see that anymore. And that's kind of the challenge, I think, of modern science is like we know so much about physics and about the way things work, and we're able to make incredible buildings and incredible rocket landings and things like that with that knowledge. But if I merely understand a tree as this random collection of atoms that are happen to be arranged in this certain way to produce these certain, effects in my mind and in the neurons in my brain, that all might be true, but I don't know. I no longer see the tree as beautiful, or at least if I do see the tree as beautiful, that beauty can't merely be explained by those atoms or by, that very materialistic process. So I absolutely understand your dilemma, and I think it's a dilemma we all have to face. Is like, how can we still, perhaps in the face of modern science, not saying that modern science is wrong or bad. It's definitely not. It's useful and it's a genuine
Yeah.
source of knowledge.
Useful,
But
not useless.
but
Mathematically less.
but in the face of that, how do we say, okay, well, there's also other ways we can know things, and
Mhm.
like I don't have to search for a experimental, testable proof hypothesis for everything in order to say I know anything. Like I can know my soul, I can know God, even if I can never put my soul under a microscope.
Yeah.
And like it's almost impossible thing to claim in this world where we've become so attached to the scientific method, scientific approach, that those things, when we start to say, well, I want you to believe in something, you can't put it under your microscope, you can't like put it in your lab. I still want you to believe in that. Like, yeah, we are going to get shot down with that.
Yeah.
So how do you still believe in that? How do you still get other people to believe in those realities that transcend the material, empirical, scientific approach?
Yep. I think you gave the basis for it, right? It's just the beauty that
Yeah.
you can see in the world, right? And like, this is gonna get into my boy's thesis, is the way that we encounter the world around us. But like, if I am looking at the world, and like you were saying, and like all these little tiny pieces, it's so disenchanting, right? If I understand everything about something, it's automatically just less, right? Like this is something that Pieper again gets at, right? The difference between curiosity and wonder, right? If I can break down everything into its little tiny pieces and just understand, the inner workings of it, that's curiosity, right? If I can satisfy my curiosity of how a building was built. But if I look at a mountain, with like this river flowing off and making this waterfall, and I'm standing there, right? And I'm encountering something which, like, I can never explain how that thing came about, right? Like, that's just this moment of absolute wonder, right? And it's like, that's something that we're losing when we're trying to explain everything through the scientific method.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like you're too zoomed in
Mm-hmm.
to like really see what what it is,
Yeah. I almost think like, yeah, I think you could say that about
Mm.
modernity to a large extent, is that we have become so zoomed in on the material causes of things, or like the chemistry behind things, that yeah, we have a really good vision of that. Like, I'm not saying it's not true and not good. Like, we really know what's going on, but yeah, we're not seeing the whole picture. And to me, I throughout this conversation, I keep thinking about like our educational system today, our educational world, where especially in universities, at least my experience is most universities, at least the ones that get a lot of funding, are doing a lot of science, a lot of math, a lot of things like that. Um, but like in contrast to like the university in medieval times, like how many of those universities, the students, how do they ever ask questions like, what is beauty, or like what is the good, what is truth, and things that are like way up high level, zoomed out, abstract, things you can't say, ooh, let me get back to you after I do this study or this experiment. But everyone still, in deep in their heart, still has to ask those questions. Like they're still there, they're still waiting for an answer. We just like our educational and intellectual pursuits nowadays just like shoot right below them
Mm-hmm.
and go to like, okay, you want to be an academic, you want to go to grad school, you want to go to college, well, you better be an engineer, or you better be a chemist or a biochemist or make vaccines, or like that's like seen as, okay, you're the educated one, you're the scientist, you're the doctor.
But educated for what purpose? Right? This is why we find so many people that just like we were talking about during the COVIDs, you know, when they lost their job, they lost everything, right? Because they didn't have those things to think about,
Yeah.
right? Like what was beautiful to them, their work. What was the truth that they had, you know, the fact that they're gonna wake up the next morning and go to work,
Okay.
right? Like that was the answer to all of their questions, was the routine they had built their life around. So when you take that routine away, right, and they're left to think for the first time in their life, you know, where they don't have something constantly filling their time, that shocking.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't even know what I would do
Yeah.
in their place.
Yeah.
Right? Just to be left with like floating in a way.
Yeah. But like I work for admissions at Wyoming Catholic College actually a little bit, and I talk to a lot of prospective students, and one of the things that I try to like sell our education on, or like one of the talking points I have is I tell them like, I think people nowadays go to school for like for two main reasons. Either they're just really nerdy and they're very interested in a certain thing,
That's obvious.
like a certain branch of STEM science or whatever, and they just really want to pursue that and get into that, not really for any other purpose, but just like because they're excited in one specific thing. And I think that's kind of a cool thing to go to education for. Like, I'm not saying that's bad. That's one thing. But I think the vast majority of students are kind of what you were saying, which was just like, I need to go to school. I need to get this piece of paper so that I can make more money. Or like, I am considering school as training for a career. And I'm gonna go get my business degree, get my computer science degree, get whatever it is that's gonna get me a good job. And that's like what I see as my point of education. And when I encounter those attitudes, I typically say, okay, well, there's also a third reason you can go to school, which I think is the best reason, is that you want to further your education. You want to go to a university because you want to form yourself to live a meaningful life.
Yeah.
And like that right there, I think that if you have that goal going into college, what you're looking for in a college is going to change completely. And I say, okay, well, Wyoming Catholic College doesn't look too bad with that, but like, it's just like having that attitude of, I am going to develop my mind, my intellect, not so I can go make more money and then buy more, pleasure activities, like not that, but because it's good in itself, and because that's what's going to make me have a meaningful life. That's what's going to lead to my fulfillment. And that's, I mean, bigger thing, or more concrete things, like that's going to make me be a better father, or like a better husband.
Mm-hmm.
Those are real things that it seems like our education should be giving us. That I think a lot of people it doesn't even cross their mind. Like they're going for money. A lot of them are also going for sports. That's another thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going to universities to become more people who are more open to the meaning of the world, or more open to the beauty, the goodness, the truth that is in creation. And because of that, all these universities, like, you see them degrading. You see all these like controversies with the highest academic institutions in our country, because their students are no longer holding them up to those goals. Like they're saying, I want you to provide me with this training, this specialized knowledge to help me be successful in this world. Don't make any claims to my soul. Don't make any claims to, the elevation of my mind. Just give me that. And, they're doing it well in that limited sphere. But in terms of the whole person, I think a lot of places fail miserably.
Yeah. Because it seems like one thing that is problematic with modern education is they're simply giving the students instant gratification, right? Like with people going for sports, especially, right? It's just to play their sport, right? And that's what they're there for, right? People go to school, why? To get their degree, right? So just so I can have it right then and there, and I can move on to the next thing, right? Like classes are jokes, right? Like I went to one of my friends' classes in LSU, and I'm like, are you for real right now? I just have to sit here. Like none of them are even paying attention, right? Because they get sent out the PowerPoint afterwards. It's all just one giant waste of time where they just sit there and, the gratification is the fact that, well, I'm going to get a grade on this quiz and then I can just Now I can go party the night away.
Yeah.
Right? There is nothing beyond, well, I just need to do this, and this, and then boom, I'm done. Right? There's no training for wanting anything beyond what, well, this is the next step in life that I'm told. Right? And that's what the modern world has come to.
Yeah, and I think you referenced it, like even just the format of education, like the whole huge room lecture series. It's like it's kind of inviting that attitude where it's very much like I am the receiver in my education.
Yeah.
I'm not actually taking the initiative,
Yeah.
which okay, some of us hate it, it's frustrating a lot, but like the method we have here at this school, the Socratic method, which is learning based on student conversation.
Yeah.
It's like it's impossible to learn from that
Most
if you're
painful for our
not.
teachers.
Yeah, it is painful. It's painful, okay? But it's like you have to take part in your education if you're going to get anything out of that. You have to take the initiative. The professor is not going to put the answers in a box and like hand them over to you, which drives us crazy most of the time. But it's really like, okay, because the professor withheld that or like didn't tell us straight off in a lecture the answer to the problems. Once we reach a lot of those answers, a lot of those moments of truth, it's like I got there, like we got there together, and like it's my thing now, and I'm gonna like that's deep in my brain at that point. As opposed to just like, okay, let me buy someone's notes who actually paid attention to the lecture so I can do that. So I think like the whole framework has to be kind of shaken up in order for this to actually change.
Absolutely.
Which people don't want to do. Like they don't want to have to go through an educational system that makes such claims to your soul and to your energy.
And this gets back to the idea that government itself, right, is failing. Right? Like one of the things that Aristotle talks about is the need for a well-educated people, right? People that the government teaches. Oh, Tom, would you fill this up as well? The government teaches them that these things are good, right? And that they ought to desire them, right? And that comes through a form of education. Well, if the government just wants people that are going to nod their heads and say yes, that's going to influence the way that they're educated, right? And that's what's so scary about especially America's educational system is the fact that the government is using their power that they've usurped from these educational systems by making them dependent upon their money to say you have to teach this way. Right. You can't say God, right? You can't say anything besides evolution, right? Forget, just forget anything like metaphysics or anything like that, right? Anything that is showing you beyond a purpose directly in front of you, right? Like that's what the government is just trying to make little cogs in the machine because that's the way that they see that it's going to work out best for them, right? It's no longer about the good of your individual citizens. It's thinking about like, how can we make this system work best for us to where we're going to be questioned the least?
But I mean, it's not even just like Aristotle and the ancients who don't like that. Like even I remember reading a lot of Thomas Jefferson's writings last year where he really hammered down on the point that in order for this whole republic democracy, government by the people for the people thing to work, we need a citizenry that is educated. That like and by educated by like well formed in that way, he wasn't referring to, knows how to computer code or knows how to do chemistry. He was referring to like a lot of other people of his time, like how to read scripture. You know how to like basically you have this basic grounding of a general formation of your soul to where you can make good decisions when you're put in power because the random farmer is going to be elected to the Senate. Like he better have been educated to the point where he can make those huge calls. And that's still the same problem we have today, but now it's like now we don't consistently give people that great formation and we instead put them in power, put them in places of influence without that basis, and that gets us into a lot of trouble.
If you think that America was founded by a bunch of country bumpkins with no idea what they're thinking, right? Like no, right? Like the idea of a republic is basically, I think Virginia or Dr. Virginia that you had on here drilled this into us, right? Like if you're going to have a republic, part of that is basically every person needs to be prepared to lead the government, right? Like being a good citizen basically means that, I'm ready to take up my mantle as a leader anytime that I'm called upon, right? And if people aren't prepared to do that, where's your government going to go, right? Like it's automatically going to deteriorate into people that ought not to be leading, right? Why? Because there are no leaders left.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
Man, those are
So anyway, the summary of this conversation is that we're thankful that we were here for 4 years.
Absolutely.
same. I mean, it's interesting, you guys, like talking from the beginning about like how you incorporate the contemplative life in your daily life.
Mhm.
And I mean, I still think about stuff we learned from school like every day.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like
That's what my sister says too.
it's wild. Like there's so many ideas that were posed while even from the books. But I feel like the coolest part is when you get to senior year when you get to share like big ideas you've all been thinking about,
Yeah.
then present them to someone. And a lot of those ideas are so profound that they could be thought for for a whole lifetime.
Yeah.
And now it's like you have like 30 or 40 of these ideas that you're like, whoa, like what does that mean? And I mean, I've just been reading like some of your classes, theses, and it's been like, wow, these are really good thoughts. You know,
Yeah.
I think about it at work or just think about it at home, and I think there's something like so fun about being able to think about deep things like what we're
Yes.
talking
Yeah.
about. It's like I get so excited, like have talk to you guys about this kind of stuff or other classmates, my classmates, and
Yeah.
kind of get to see what it's all for. You know, like
Mhm.
start to see what God's game plan is, like his ideas, like why he created the world, what our role is in that world, like the joy of life,
Yeah.
what it means, and then like we kind of get to see like the problems how it unfolds. But there's like I don't know something very humanly gratifying and like being in that experience of like living in this world. You know, it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
and then having friends that are on that same journey with you,
Mhm.
it's incredible. Like
Yeah.
I've been finding it more and more like just, you know, so we've been graduated for almost 3 years now.
That's crazy.
It's crazy to think about.
You were a
Doesn't-
senior and I was a freshman.
It feels like it doesn't feel like that long. Like
I know it
Years.
doesn't.
they flew by so fast.
Yeah.
Um, but just like how I think I think in a way being with the friends that we have here
Mhm.
doing these types of things is almost like what we all have always dreamed for, you know, like um yeah, and it's I'm kind of losing my words right now, but I guess I was just trying to talk about like how the contemplative life really blossoms when you have people that also want to see the meaning in life go through that journey with you.
Oh, absolutely. And that they challenge you to do it.
Mhm.
That's the thing that I've realized most, over the 4 years is like the level of which I do my schoolwork and I actually do the contemplative life thing is dependent upon the people I'm friends with.
Mhm.
Right? If my friends are just like, yeah, let's go watch a movie. Well, that's what they're doing. So I guess that's what I'm going to do. It's not that I want to do, it's just that. But if you find people around you that are willing to go the distance with you and talk about these things, right? And they get excited about it and you get excited about it. And best of all, if you could disagree with each other, that makes it that much better, right? Because like one thing we were talking about yesterday was the importance of everybody thinking for themselves,
Yeah.
right? And not just accepting the noise and just seeing with other people's eyes the world, but seeing with your own eyes, right? We all think about every single thing differently,
Mhm.
right? We were all brought up in a different place, in a different way, with our own prejudices, and those things, right, form the people that we are. And so when we all come here together, right, in pursuit of the good thing, the liberal arts, we're all pursuing it together, but we're all bringing with ourselves like all of the different ways that we grew up and way we think about things. And that's what's so fascinating about the Socratic method, right? Is it's wild in there, right? Right? Like when you like get in there and like you all read the exact same text, but the amount of thoughts that can come out from like a 20-page reading is just wild when you have 15 to 20 people in a classroom. Like, I would have never have even thought that that could ever be insinuated by that word. How did you